Thank you all for being here. I am Claudia Cruz, Director of the Internship Program at the Reynolds School of Journalism here at the University of Nevada, Reno. And I'm also the Director or the lead of the Spanish language courses, which include Journalism 306, Latinos Through the Eyes of the Media, and Journalism 465, Noticiero Móvil, which is a news media production class. We're very excited to have two excellent speakers today, distinguished individuals, to speak about the topic of journalism, mental wellness, and avoiding burnout. For those who may not understand our industry, news happens very quickly, and there tends to be fires, there tends to be crime, sometimes an individual who's been maybe hurt by a vehicle or someone with a weapon. So as journalists, it is our job, because it is our job, to go to the scenes and be witnesses so that we can then inform a community about the facts of the situation. It could be because they're neighbors, or because it's a family member, or because it's on your route to work. Who knows? But those images, those moments do not just disappear because we're no longer at the scene of the incident. When we go back to our newsrooms, we're reliving these moments over and over again as we're writing our stories, as we're working on our videos, as we're working now on audio, and increasingly clearly with images, moving or still. So we felt that as a School of Journalism, it was very important to take the next step, not just teach students how to be journalists and get to the scene and report it correctly, but how do we create an environment where we're teaching about trauma-informed journalism so that our students learn to cope and learn and gain strategies to manage this very stressful environment. And when there are moments of, and I won't shy away from using the word traumatic moments, that we're able to come back from that and hopefully remain in the field, because that's the goal. Our goal is to give you skills, give the students skills so they remain in the field, because their work is important. So again, I'm very happy for those who can join us on Zoom, the people who are here today, and I guess our amazing speakers. So I will introduce them very briefly, just tell you who they are, and they will go through their names because, again, they have such extensive biographies, it's kind of boring for you to listen to me. And then I'll start off with the questions. We'll do this panel discussion for about 45 minutes, and then I'll open it up to questions from members here in the audience and hopefully on Zoom. So thank you very much. I will start with our on-campus guest, Christina Cendejas, who is a PhD scholar and works in the counseling services. And joining her all the way from Long Beach, California, is Jesús Ayala, who is a broadcast professor at Cal State Long Beach. So thank you very much. I'm going to pass the mic along, and you can continue to add to your biographies.
Yeah. So I would just add that in addition to being a professor, I'm a former journalist, or, I've been a journalist for 24 years. I spent 20 of those years at ABC News. And a few years back, I was actually diagnosed with a post-traumatic stress disorder because I was exposed so much to traumatic events, right? And so sometimes as journalists, we lose track of how many traumatic incidents we've covered. Whether they're natural disasters, or whether they're mass shootings, or whether they're just very sensitive emotional interviews that sometimes we walk away with and have that sense of heaviness. And so ever since I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, I sort of wanted to obviously process, what my experience was like. And to be honest, I felt very cheated by the industry, mostly because I was, like all of you, I attended fantastic schools, and I was trained on all the state-of-the-art equipment. I was trained how to interview people. But then I said, well, wait a minute, I had fantastic professors, but why didn't anyone warn me, hey, by the way, heads up, there is a very important mental health component. There is a very specific way that you should approach trauma victims for their sake, but also for your own sake. Now my passion is to talk about this and open up, because when you go through something heavy and something difficult, you always want to find the silver lining. And so now my silver lining is to ensure that my students, and all students for that matter, are well trained in trauma-informed reporting.
Hi, my name is Christina. I earned my PhD in counseling psychology at the University of Oregon, and I am now a licensed psychologist that works here at Counseling Services. I love my job. I love working with college students. I love working with mental health. I work with students on a variety of issues, whether that be anxiety, depression, stress, trauma, and I'm just very passionate about that. I've done some research on post-traumatic growth. So yes, helping people who have experienced trauma and how that impacts them, but also how do people grow through trauma? Why is it different for some people to grow through trauma versus to feel stuck in that stress response? And how do we work through those stress responses too? How do we develop resources, coping strategies to be able to get through those really hard moments? So I'm really happy to join you all here.
Yeah. So, Jesús,
Yes.
tell me how you got to this moment. And since you said I can ask you anything, what was maybe that definitive moment that said, I am done with the daily reporting, I need to take care of myself? And then we can maybe circle back to some of the other moments you had, but what was that straw that broke the camel's back?
A lot of times people think that trauma involves a single event. And in some cases it does. In some cases you have direct trauma, which means you went to a wildfire and you got injured, or you were at a protest and someone attacked you, right? So there are very direct traumas. There is something that is called complex trauma or complex PTSD, which is actually a little bit more insidious because it's not just one event. And so for me, I'm unfortunately one of those people that develop complex PTSD because of an accumulation of my entire career, right? So maybe it was that very difficult incident that I had in Haiti that contributed to it. I can tell you that when I was Haiti covering the earthquake there in 2010, this just goes to show how bad it was, right? There were rotting corpses out in the sun because it was so hot. And what did journalists have to do? We had to put toothpaste under our noses just to disguise the smell. And as a journalist, I didn't think much of it. It was just like, okay, I'm here to report. I have to do what I have to do. So I'm going to put toothpaste under my nose. I can tell you now that I can always recognize the smell of death, right? And that's just one example. All the times that I put my life literally in danger covering a wildfire. I've been like this close to a wildfire where the flames are here. And while I didn't feel in danger at that moment, I can tell you now in retrospect that my nervous system did feel that I was in danger. So badass journalist Jesús didn't think he was in danger, but my body did feel like I was in danger. And I think sometimes we don't realize as journalists that when we are covering these moments, we insulate ourselves. We create this protective mechanism that allows us to be cavalier in that moment and run into danger. But there's a great book that if this resonates with you at all, you should get this book. I read it. It's my favorite book. The Body Keeps a Score. Your body will keep the score. So every time you've had a stressful moment, anytime you've had an incident of trauma, your body will keep a little record. And so our nervous system allows us to go into these situations and tackle it in that moment. But we're supposed to be responsible. And after the event, we're supposed to sort of have a debriefing moment. By the way, all first responders, whether we're talking about policemen, EMTs, firefighters, they all have to have mandatory debrief sessions before they can return to work. I feel that journalists are first responders because we also have to respond the same way that they do. But unfortunately, we don't have those mandatory debrief sessions. So what happens when you're a journalist? You come back from a very heavy story, you come into the newsroom, you take your victory lap. Oh my God, the coverage was amazing. Yay, yay, yay. And everybody congratulates you. And then your editor or your boss says, oh, by the way, here's the next story, go. How many of us actually take the time to say, you know what? wow, Haiti was really rough. Let me sit here and process this. Let me sit here and journal about it. Let me sit here and actively try to tap into my emotions. Let me make sure that I'm having an actual honest emotional reaction. Because if I just witnessed death, it shouldn't be like, whatever. That should impact us. We're humans. It should impact us. But I think many of us have been told, leave emotion at the door. Emotions don't matter. And so we try to sort of sugarcoat it. We insulate it. But the emotions are there. And so unfortunately, if you go through a life like I did, almost 20 years of journalism, without having proper emotional reactions, it's like a pressure cooker. You know, the body's smart. The body will say, okay, I'm keeping track of this. I'm going to store it. But eventually, you're going to run out of space. And when you run out of space, it's going to be bad. And so unfortunately, in my case, you know, you implode and you get PTSD. And once that happened, I had to, quit.
Yeah. I'll come back to you, Jesús. I want to bring Christina in here. So how do you know that you need to check in, right? He mentioned this nervous response. As a counselor, what should we be looking at? What does that nervous response feel like?
Great question. So when I think about the nervous response, so we can think about two different types of nervous systems, our sympathetic nervous system and our parasympathetic nervous system. So getting a little biology on our journalists in here. But our sympathetic nervous system is designed for the stress response. Our body reacts this way because it has been helpful, right? We've gone through years of evolution because this is helpful. It's still here because it's helpful for us to recognize. It's helped us to survive. When we think about the stress response, I like to use the example of if I were to be hiking in Tahoe and come across a bear. How would I react if I were to come across a bear? One option, right, is to run away, right? Flight, run away from the bear, completely run away, right? Another option is to fight that bear, right? There are some bears that we're supposed to fight, I think. I don't know. I would not survive that if I were to fight a bear. But we might fight, we might flight and run away. We also might freeze, right? In that moment, completely freeze, try to hide behind a tree, just try to be invisible so that that thing that is causing us stress goes away. That bear goes away. The last one that's a little bit newer, that's maybe a little bit more with interpersonal relationships, is the fawn response. This idea of over-apologizing, trying to smile through really difficult events, people-pleasing, kind of thinking about those types of things. So when we think about it, right, one of the really important things is to recognize maybe which of these stress responses do we do naturally? Do we naturally kind of get the big emotions, intense emotions, yell, kind of get upset really easily? Maybe that's our fight response. Maybe do we flight, right? Do we try to avoid things, right? It sounds like the newsroom is a place that kind of reinforces that avoidance, right? Avoid this emotion. Don't feel this. That's reinforced, right? When the people tell us, great, you're doing a good job, keep going. Right. Maybe we freeze. Maybe in that moment, people can't recognize that we're feeling really stressed. Maybe that we're experiencing really stressful things because we're just frozen and people don't see that reaction. We feel numb in that moment. Or we fawn, we smile, and people really think we're doing okay, and we're not. Right. So being able to recognize some of these things, being able to recognize our stress response, maybe that's our heart racing, maybe that's our breath becoming a little bit more elevated, maybe that's starting to have those feelings of panic, right? What does overwhelm feel like for you? What does it feel like in your body? And which of those kind of stress responses do you resonate with? And it might be one and it might be more than one of those, right? In different situations. But those are some of the things that I would look out for, recognizing that.
Parasympathetic?
Yes. Yeah, so the sympathetic nervous system is all about that stress response, right? It gets activated when we're experiencing stress, happens with bears, and now happens with things like exams, tests, not quite bears anymore, right? Our parasympathetic nervous system is more of that rest and digest. So it's the opposite of the sympathetic nervous system. Both can't exist at the same time. So one of the really nice things about therapy and learning different coping strategies is if you're able to recognize what your stress response is, then we can actually talk about coping strategies that help us and help the body, trick the body into thinking that we're relaxed, trick the body into thinking we're feeling that parasympathetic nervous system. So that way we can really activate that and help to calm down and get into that more kind of restful state, help that stress leave our body in that way.
And as a patient or as someone who's gone through it, I would definitely agree that numbness, that feeling of numbness of just kind of feeling like, I kind of want to address an emotion, but I feel numb about it. It's technically called dissociation if you want to be technical, but that numbing sensation is very common among journalists. Also, the feeling of having to take the edge. And so we were talking earlier that I've done some studies on this, but in my most recent study, I asked people who covered the Uvalde mass shooting what kind of coping technique they had to deal with their emotions. 89% of them said alcohol. So if you find yourself constantly having to take off the edge, whether it's with alcohol, marijuana, or any other type of numbing substance, you might, I think we convince ourselves like, I had a really hard week, I really deserve this drink. But if it's every weekend, well, that isn't normal. So I think that numbing is something that we have to watch out for.
Thank you, Jesús. I'll stay on this topic because you mentioned how there's mandatory debriefings for first responders, not journalists. What does that look like that you have? What kind of mandatory briefings are you aware of that they receive that you hope journalists should receive as well?
So with first responders, there's structures and systems in place. First responders like EMTs, policemen, firefighters, etc., actually have to sit down with a clinical psychologist, and they have to answer a questionnaire. And so it's usually, clinical psychologist sitting in front of you and saying, hey, no, we're going to address this. I know you're telling me you're fine, but I want to talk a little bit more about this event. And I'm going to be the one that determines that you're okay. And I'm going to be the one that signs off on whether you're okay to return. So it's pretty much a mandatory counseling session, if you will. I don't see the news industry going down that route because, as you know, the news industry is suffering a lot from cutting budgets. So I can't see a newsroom actually like hiring a full-time psychologist to have these debriefings. But, the thing that I tell my students is find a way. We can do our own debriefings, right? So, look, I'm not going to do this while I'm in Haiti. While I'm in Haiti covering the earthquake, I need that armor because, quite frankly, it's keeping me safe. It's helping me to hold it together, right? If I were to start acknowledging my emotions while I'm on assignment, I would probably break down. So that's not the time. But you can have a debrief on your own when you go back home and you're in a safe place, and you may be, so you go back home, don't say, hey friends, I'm back, let's go drinking. No, take a full day to yourself where you just sit with yourself. When we're alone, that's when we start to notice what's really kind of happening. So I would urge people to take at least one full mental health day where they are alone. Maybe they sleep in, maybe they're resting, but also, how am I feeling? Checking in on purpose with your emotions. Now, here's the thing. As human beings, I think so many of us avoid emotion. We avoid it at all costs. It's the reason why we don't want to break up with our boyfriend because it's going to hurt. It's the reason why we just don't really want to acknowledge emotion because it can be painful. But what's going to keep you safe in the long run and what's going to not lead to burnout or worse to PTSD or something that actually can be traumatic is you checking in with yourself and making sure that those emotions don't get stagnant, because we know that when emotions get stagnant in the body, they will create reactions. Eye twitching is a very common thing, right? With stress, the eye twitching, the neck stiffness. So yeah, the ringing in the ear, or just there are physical emotions, and so we also know that stagnant emotions cause illness. So in the long run, you should be acknowledging those emotions, and I think so. If we take the time to just debrief on ourselves and check in with ourselves and say, "Hey, okay, Jesús, I need to have a heart-to-heart with you." So imagine your inner well-being being like power. And having that sort of self-dialogue, how are we? You just lived through something really hard. How do you feel about it? It doesn't have to be like extensive. It could be quick. I love to journal because it really helps me to get out emotions. But just getting it out and acknowledging is, I think, a good way. I don't know if you have other suggestions for like an actual personal debrief.
Yeah, you're bringing up a really great point about that avoidance, right? And we do it in such creative ways. So one way, right, is that kind of bed rot. Like, I'm just gonna rot in bed. I'm not gonna get out of bed today, and I'm just gonna lay here, and that's my day, right? We do it in other ways, like scrolling through TikTok for hours, right? Distracting ourselves. Maybe just marathoning our favorite TV show, right? We do this avoidance in such creative ways. I have a friend who will always keep themselves extremely busy. They never have a free time during the day. Their schedule is completely packed. They do it because they don't want to feel anything during the whole day. I'm just gonna keep going, right? And so if we think about that, right, we think about what are our creative ways of doing that? What are times that maybe I fall into that avoidance because I don't want to feel this emotion right now. I don't want to think about this. I don't want to feel this. It doesn't feel good, right? It feels unpleasant to sit with some of that stress. Instead, we think about what are more active coping strategies? How can we approach some of this is another way to think about it. And one way, right, is sitting down and having that honest conversation with ourselves. What do I need right now? How do I problem solve this? I'm noticing that I really want to go grab that drink with a friend and just numb this out. How do I problem solve that? If I go to that bar, how am I going to take care of myself? Maybe I notice, right, I'm feeling really numb. I just want to go skydive. I want to go do something. Feel a really big, intense emotion right now because I'm so numb. What else can I be doing to be caring for myself right now? I think a lot about when it comes to some of these like recurring memories, right? When we think about smells, visions, right? These pieces that don't leave our mind, those recurring memories, right? We can think about how can I be a little bit more strategic in targeting that? If it is a smell, how can I have another smell that is more pleasant? How can I cancel that out, right? Maybe I need to carry like my favorite perfume with me. Maybe I need to carry an essential oil with me, right? Something that I can smell that could just activate a different feeling. If it's a feeling of touch, right? We've touched something, someone, and that memory is there, right? Maybe I need to cancel that out with another type of touch, something that is more soothing to me. Right. If it's a vision, one of my favorite things to do is we were actually talking earlier about taking that kind of vacation from home. One of my favorite ways to do that is actually visualizing one of my favorite safe places. And so that looks different for everyone, right? But taking a moment to think, where is a place that I felt safe? What is a place that felt really relaxing to me? That could be, right, thinking about being home with family and just around the dinner table, enjoying time together. That could be the top of my favorite hike and just remembering what that view is, right? But taking some moments to, right, cancel out that vision with something else that's a little bit more pleasant to care for my body, to help that emotion move. Other people are more physical. I love yoga. Yoga is a great way for me to kind of move that emotion through my body, right? By being physical, but also acknowledging how is that impacting my body. So really thinking about, right, how do I be active in this process? How do I approach some of these emotions in the way that feels right in that moment for me?
Yeah, and one thing that I found, sometimes emotions, sometimes it's not even traumatic. Sometimes, like for me, that smell from Haiti, it wasn't even a traumatic smell that I had to really work hard to get over. Honestly, my body and my mind just wanted an acknowledgement. So I think a lot of times the simple acknowledgement is all that it takes. But again, when we're avoiding, sometimes your body is going to say, well, I'm sending you signals and you keep like ignoring me. And so, you don't ever want to get to the point, because your body's going to send you signals. First it's the eye twitching, then it's the stiff neck. I mean, those are signals from your body that is saying, hey, pay attention. Sooner or later, if that's not catching your attention, then your body's going to be like, well, here's a panic attack. And trust me, if you ever get a panic attack, then you do pay attention. You cannot ignore a panic attack. Most people that have had panic attacks will tell you, yeah, there were warning signs. My body was trying to warn me, but I just kept ignoring it. So the body will keep trying to tell you until you finally pay attention.
I am guilty of the eye twitching, of the tinnitus in my ear, of the stiff neck and cramps, I can't move my neck, and of the lower back pain, which but not yet hit the panic attack, luckily. So what's interesting about journalism is that it's a chosen career that's also layered on top of our daily lives, right? And in honor of Hispanic Heritage Month, I also want to bring this back to some of the layered experiences of our Latino students and Latino reporters, right? There's lots of things that happen there where part of the stressors that I think students have and Latino journalists have is that we're always trying to do more and be more because we're fighting, or we feel like we're fighting a system, or we feel like we're fighting for representation, to be seen. And that adds an extra layer of stress on top of the schoolwork and being like really good at school and then being that badass reporter, right? Because how do we get promoted if we don't show that we are willing to do these sometimes dangerous and be in these critical moments? So let's bring this back to how maybe our community as well of Latinos and just generally maybe students, but again, I think about Latinos because you mentioned Uvalde, right? There's some moments where you might be a Latino reporter reporting on tragedies that are directed at our community. And you can't leave your feelings at the door, but you still have to compartmentalize while you're there. So I'm kind of curious, Jesús, maybe how you're working with your students to prepare them for moments like that. And Christina, how as a counselor here at UNR, that you hear of all these different moments where you, from students who may be Latino that have these layered experiences. Again, maybe they're undocumented students, right, who are reporters, and we're asking them not only to put aside their lack of privilege in certain situations, but also on top of that, go report on something, right? So we're adding more. We might be adding more stress, right? So how, as maybe a newsroom environments and as a school, can we better help our students?
I'll tell you something that's super interesting, and I wrote in our book a little bit about this, and one of the chapters that I wrote in here, I wrote about imposter syndrome. I can tell you, I've experienced imposter syndrome as a student. I've experienced it as a journalist. I mean, now I've been a journalist for 24 years. I have numerous awards. I'm a very well-recognized journalist who should not have imposter syndrome. And when I transitioned into academia, I had imposter syndrome all over again. So it's one of those things that's insidious and doesn't really go away. And I notice it with my students. I think culturally too, Latinos, we've been taught just because of history to be good workers, to be loyal employees. And so it's always like, my mom always taught me, to have a really, really great work ethic, which I appreciate it. But at the same time, it was always like, don't complain, just be happy that you're there. You're lucky that you're there. And so then I think our parents were well-intentioned, but I think sometimes what that does is it creates self-worth issues. We're always not sure if we're worthy enough to be in these spaces. And so one of the things that I constantly have to tell my students is, you are here. You are worthy. You applied just like everybody else, and you got your place. I have to tell myself, you are a tenure-track professor. You beat out 200 other applicants, and you were the one that was chosen. So, and we just sometimes have to remind ourselves about that, right? Because we forget. I think culturally, the other thing that I think sort of plagues us as Latinos is that hustle culture. Because sometimes we don't feel worthy, we have to overcompensate, and that means we're going to work really, really, really hard. I've learned the hard way that it's not sustainable. When I was a younger reporter, I wanted to be that badass reporter, but because, when I started at ABC in my newsroom, I was the only Latino. And so I always felt like, well, to overcompensate for being the only Latino, I have to work twice as hard. And so I always felt that I had to outperform or overproduce. And, as I've aged, I have to tell you, I don't think that's a good way of looking at things. So I've sort of taught myself how to work smart and not hard. And I've also given myself permission to not always constantly have to be productive. I mean, we think that we have to be productive every day. Why? It's okay if you're not productive one day, But the way that we're wired, oh, no. In fact, I've had a very rough week, and I've traveled this, here. And so I know that tomorrow I'm taking a day off. I'm going to sleep in, and I'm not going to do anything. Now, the overachiever in me is going to try to convince me that I should be productive and do something. But I'm going to fight it because I don't believe in hustle culture anymore. I am worthy just as I am. And in order to be fully productive, I need to factor in rest.
I relate to a lot of what you're saying about that imposter syndrome, right? Because no matter what the field is, I feel like we experience that, right? I thought maybe I'll feel confident when I get into that PhD program. Maybe I'll feel confident when I defend my dissertation, right? Will I feel confident now that I'm a licensed therapist, right? And now, right, being invited to a panel, I'm like, I know what I'm talking about. I know I can do this. And yet, right, that those feelings creep in, right? So I'm definitely relating to that. And I know a lot of folks in our community can. But with the folks that I'm working with, yes, I do a workshop for especially our first gen students on imposter syndrome, right? What is it? How do I recognize it? What type of imposter syndrome? How do I combat that, right? And a lot of the things that I hear from students that are really effective is some of that self-affirmations, right? Some of that self-compassion. How do I be kinder to myself in this process? I'm the first maybe in my family to do something like this. Wow, I've done a lot to even get here, even to have a seat at this table, right? Like I've done a lot to be able to make it here. Being able to recognize the hard work when we do it. How many of us, right, when we do something really hard, we get a good grade, do we just go, okay, what do I need to do next? What do I need to study for next? And don't recognize, right, like, wow, I worked really hard for that grade. I should be proud of that. I should celebrate that, right? We're taught to just keep going. And so how do we be kinder to ourselves? How do we recognize our accomplishments? One of the things that I really recommend for our Latino students is thinking about our values, right? One of the things that we really value is our work ethic. We're hard workers, right? Everyone in our community is a hard worker to get to where we are at. And, right, the flip side of that can be that hustle culture, right? The flip side of that can be, right, overworking ourselves to the point that we get burnt out. And so, right, how do we recognize our values without taking it to that extreme? Another value we have, right, is that interconnectedness, our community, right, of relying on each other, supporting each other through hard things. How do we widen that net? How do we find those support people at the university even to start, right? How do we make connections with our classmates who later down the road, when we're both amazing journalists, can, right, debrief with each other because we have that connection? Or how do I reach out when I've always been told I got to do it on my own? I got to be independent. I got to work hard. I can't rely on anyone else, right? How do we widen that net? How do we rely on our friends when we're having a hard moment? How do we go to therapy when we need a little bit more support, right? How do we go and get services if we're undocumented, right? Like, how do we reach out when we need some more support? Because we cannot do it on our own.
And one tip I'll offer, I've learned this, with age. I now have a 1-year plan, a 5-year plan, and a 10-year plan. Because when I first became a tenure track professor, I'll tell you, that very first year, I burned myself out. And in retrospect, I realized, you try to do in 1 year what really is more realistic in like 2 to 3 years, but you overextended yourself. So what's going to happen when you overextend yourself? You're going to get burned out. So then now I'm like, no, my 1-year plan is this. My 5-year plan can include other things that I'm passionate about, but they're part of the 5-year plan, not part of the 1-year plan. And so then that way you kind of keep yourself accountable and know you're not overextending yourself. And so, yeah, I live by that 1 year, 5-year, and then 10-year. One day I want to write another book, 5-year or 10-year, not 1 year. I'm not writing another book right now.
I love asking myself this idea, right? Like, what do I need to do right now? Like, what do I actually need to do right now? Because probably a lot of that, right, is in the future. It doesn't need to happen right now, today, this week even, no, right? But what do I need to do right now actually might help us to have a little bit more freedom in our day to be able to self-care, connect with others, take a deep breath, finally.
No one's pressuring you. We pressure ourselves. No one's saying, you have to do this now. It's us.
Thank you so much. I want to take this moment to acknowledge our other partners and sponsors of this event. The didn't mean to forget the beginning, but in addition to the Reynolds School of Journalism, also the Alianza faculty and staff group here on campus, which is the affinity organization committee with Latino, Hispanic, Latinx faculty and staff, which, to your point, is that expanded network, right? How we're interconnected. And the goal is that with amongst ourselves, if we can be of support to ourselves, then we can be support to the students. And also the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, Nevada chapter, of which I'm president. But the chapter in NHJ is, again, a broader organization with that's celebrated 40 years this year. And that means 40 years of journalists who have gone through this, many who are in broadcast roles, just like Jesús, who have experience in, again, tragedies and hopefully positive events as well. But these are journalists who can be a resource to the younger generation coming in. Burnout. I want to maybe expand on that. How you're taking the day off tomorrow. Thanks for being here today. I'm going to go to the lake on Saturday. So after tomorrow, I'm taking a break. But for students, sometimes it's a very different experience when you don't have the money to maybe take a full day off. You still have classes. You still have work, right? Because maybe you also have work outside of class. What kind of tips and tools, Christina, I'll go to you first. And maybe we can talk a little bit about the counseling services and what you offer here. But additional resources for burnout or just tips for students.
One of the things that I talk to students a lot about is, right, how to manage that burnout. How do we self-care when things are really stressful? And one of my favorite things to do, right, is, okay, how do I add something to what I'm doing now, right? Not adding more work. No, don't get me wrong. I'm not asking to add more work, right? But how do I add something enjoyable to what I'm doing right now? If I have to study, if I have to work really hard on my homework, can I do that with my community, with friends? If I have to do that and I need to do something solo, I need to read a book by myself, can I do that over at Manzanita Lake, right? Can I do it somewhere enjoyable so that way I am also taking care of my mind at the same time, right? It is slowing down. It is not, right, trying to add more to our plate. It's trying to take those things off. It's learning how to say no, right? Just really hard for me. I don't say no. What I say instead is, I can't say yes to that. That's my creative way of saying no, right? We can think about those ways, right? Like what feels more natural for me to say? How do I say no? How do I be assertive when I need some more support, right? What are some of those self-care things? I really like to think about self-care as like a lot of different domains. So I might be thinking about my physical self-care, right? Can I make it to that yoga class? Can I go over to the gym? You're already paying those student fees. It's free for you. Head over there, right? Maybe I can just go for a walk, right? I think about more of the mental self-care, right? Journaling, being able to, the social self-care, connecting with family, friends, mentors, right? Spiritual self-care, it could be connecting if we are religious, connecting in that way, or maybe spiritual, crystals, nature, right? Whatever that looks like for you. So really thinking about those domains and maybe coming up with a list of what works for you, right? What are things that I enjoy? What helps me to feel relaxed? When's the last time I felt content, relaxed, happy? What was I doing at that point? A lot of those things were probably free. Just hanging out with friends, free. Walking around the lake, free, right? So really thinking about what can I do in terms of that. When students do need some more support, we do recommend counseling services. We have a lot of really wonderful services there. One, if you don't want to initiate therapy, are interested in that, we have our Let's Talk sessions. Those are drop-in. You come over to our CS Annex located in Great Basin Hall, and you're able to talk to someone, vent, get some advice on an issue, whatever it might be, in a private space. If you want to initiate therapy, get to know a therapist, see what services make sense for you. We have our same-day sessions. You can schedule them the same day that you want to come in. They're available online. You would just go to our website to sign up for a time that would work for your schedule. And if you're able to do that, we have some really amazing groups. We have some trauma-specific groups. One that I would recommend if you're just interested in learning more about trauma is our trauma education group. In that group, it's some folks who have experienced trauma, it's some folks who want to support loved ones who have experienced trauma, or just folks who want to learn more about it. So that one's more of a class where you get to just learn about trauma and learn about more coping strategies that work for you. We also have more specific trauma services. If you are experiencing PTSD symptoms, we do have those services. And then for our Latino community as well, we have some more specific groups. I lead Café con Pan, so I have coffee, pan dulce over at the Multicultural Center. It's just an informal place to chat and get to know other Latino students and their experiences on campus. I also lead UndocuChats, so that's for our undocumented students and also others who are experiencing immigration-related concerns, especially around the election. Really wanted to create a supportive space for those students. And then we also have just a general mindfulness class. I think mindfulness can be such a great way to build our emotional awareness, to build awareness of that mind-body connection. And that mindfulness class can just be a great way to start in terms of that. So really wonderful services over there, and happy to tell you more if you come in for a same-day session.
Pacing, right? It's about not overextending ourselves, learning to say no. When I was younger, I did have a problem saying no, and now Claudia will tell you, I just say no. I'll just say I can't, or I'm overextended, I already have too many commitments. And I used to think also culturally we're taught to always say yes to opportunities. And so that I used to be like, no, this is a good opportunity. Say yes. What I've actually learned is that even if you say no to an opportunity, it will either come back or a different opportunity comes up. So I don't feel like I'm actually losing out when I say no to an opportunity because I have a lot of opportunities and I'm okay with the opportunities that I have. We hear a lot about work-life balance. And I think when we hear about it, the employer always gets blamed. And I'm here to tell you that there is no company out there that is going to make your work-life balance a priority. No one is going to tell you, take a mental health day. No one's going to tell you, you're really overextending yourself. No. So it's really incumbent on you to establish healthy habits now, because I'm going to tell you, it gets worse as you go on in life. It just really does. And then I think the last thing that I would say is really enjoy what you do. Journalism is such a difficult career. It is so competitive. I mean, we literally work hard and put ourselves in harm's way and cover very tragic, traumatic stories. And somehow we still do it. Because at the end of the day, even when I have covered those stories, I could have a very bad day, but I'm still passionate about it. And the burnout research does say that people who enjoy their jobs or their careers are less likely to burn out than the people that are miserable doing what they're doing. So you don't want to be in a state of misery. If you're already a student and you're saying, I don't know that I want to do this, then that's okay. And maybe the answer is this isn't for you. And if that's the case, it's okay. But, really, this is as good as it gets, because right now you're not covering super hard traumatic stories. Right now, I'm sure that your professors allow you cover, for the most part, the stories that you want to cover. Once you're doing it professionally, sometimes you don't even get to cover the stories you want. You just get assigned a story, and they're giving you the paycheck, so you have to cover the story. So I think, if you really have to enjoy this, and even on the worst of days, you have to end the day with, you know what? Yeah, that was a hard day, but I'm still making a difference, or I'm still passionate about this, or I'm making a difference for my community, or I'm one of the first Latinos that's doing this, so I'm paving pathways for more Latinos to do this. There just has to be something that really makes you happy about doing it. If you can't find something positive, then it might be time to switch gears.
So staying on that topic a little bit, because I know you have an area of research called the Mindful Newsroom. How do you then, I don't say ensure that your students are getting the message, but how do you build in mindfulness into your curriculum?
Great question. So I have spent most of my time researching and envisioning of what should happen. I love that you touched upon mindfulness, because one of the things that we've been talking about is avoiding emotions, right? But mindfulness actually forces us in a very gentle way to sort of just sit with ourselves And a lot of people think that mindfulness is meditation. It's not. When you're doing mindfulness, you're not supposed to like sit like a Buddha and do Om and have everything just go completely blank. In fact, mindfulness is just really about doing your best to sit still and find stillness, because that slows things down. By focusing on your breath, you could always find stillness and keep it in the present moment. But what you're going to find is that as you are doing the mindfulness technique, things are going to pop up. Oh, I have to go pick up so-and-so. Oh, I have to work on that research. Oh, I have to go, prepare dinner. And so as these things come up, you kind of put them in little boxes, like to do, like just little boxes. And so what you're doing is you're acknowledging what's causing you stress, right? And because you're acknowledging it, then you can take a proactive step to resolve it. Sometimes I tell my brain, like you said, sometimes it's like, brain, I know I have to do this, but I don't need to do it now. I'll get back to you in a week. And so sometimes it's gently just like slapping my own to-do list and the slapping it and saying, no, not now. I'll get to that like tomorrow. But it's just a way to really focus on what's effective now. I will be incorporating it into my newsroom, because one of the things that we know about mindfulness, it's a very helpful coping technique for stress. And so one of the things that I'm going to start doing in my own newsroom, because I manage a broadcast studio and I have a broadcast newsroom, is we're going to starting every day with mindfulness. And so then that way, instead of starting off, in journalism, we have deadlines. And just the mere fact that we have deadlines creates stress. It's like, oh my God, I have to find the video and I have to write the script. And when you have that frantic mindset, it's like, it's not an effective way to work. You're starting off the day with stress, go. You're actually damaging your nervous system. And so isn't it a better, more effective way to say, hold up. Okay, I know I have to do all these things, but I'm going to do it in an effective, calm way. I'm going to get to you, but I'm not going to go frantically about my day. I'm going to be composed, and I will now have a mindful way of doing it. So mindful is just being mindful. We're not going to let stress take over. We're going to control that stress. We're going to breathe through it, and we're going to turn that stress into a mindful way of working.
Did you want to add anything?
Sure. One of the things that I love about mindfulness is kind of what you're alluding to too, right? This idea that usually our mind focuses on the negative, the thing that's causing us stress, right? The thing we want to go away. And we end up missing out on so much of life when that happens, right? Well, all we're thinking about is a stressful thing. If I'm having dinner with a friend, I'm not focused on whatever we're talking about. I'm not focused on our connection at that moment, right? I'm focused on, I got to go home. I got to finish this exam. I got to do these things, right? So one of the things I love about mindfulness, it helps us to be more present. It helps us to engage in life and not just see the negative things that are happening, but also what's neutral. How did I feel about the food? Am I enjoying this, right? Like, what are the other things that are happening in this moment? Can I kind of broaden that perspective instead of narrowing it and narrowing my life in that process?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, but I think mindfulness will be very useful in many newsrooms. And, I don't know of a newsroom that practice mindfulness. So my student newsroom may be the first, and I'll publish a study and then you can read it.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll be the second newsroom to try this. I definitely noticed that, and I've been working on mindfulness on Sundays, right? Because Monday's coming up, and then I'm already thinking about the classes I've got to teach, that first email I have to send out in the morning because I've been thinking about it all weekend. But then it makes my Sunday so stressful that I'm not enjoying my Sundays anymore, right? So I'm like, I got to just worry about work on Monday morning, right? So it sounds like...
yourself permission to do that. Because I think sometimes, again, it goes back to feeling the need to be productive and feeling the need to produce or generate something, that then suddenly our day off becomes about, advancing. And I think we trick ourselves into thinking, well, if I started today, then my Monday won't be as hectic. But no, Sunday should have been about rest. So it just kind of backfired because you tricked yourself into working. You just need to give yourself permission, just like I'm going to go home and give myself permission to cuddle with my dog and catch up on a show. And then when my mind is saying, but you really have to finish that study so that it can go to peer review, I will say, yes, I know, but I'll do it when I do it. It'll get done. I mean, it always gets done. I have an amazing record of getting things done. So it will. But what I need now is rest. And so just giving yourself that permission goes such a long way.
Yeah. And we do it in tricky ways too, right? Because it's not just like, what do I need to do for work on Monday? But like, what do I need to do for the house today? What chores do I need to do? Do I need to go groceries? Do I need to do all these things, right? And what do I actually need to get done, right? And what is actually going to be restful? Is it restful for me to clean my whole house? Personally, no. I know that there are some folks who enjoy that, love that feeling of clean. It feels very therapeutic for them. I'm not one of those. So yes, maybe I need to get that done, but that's not going to be my restful day, right? That doesn't mean I'm resting that day. So what do I actually need? Do I need to cuddle my dogs, right? Do I need to go on a walk with my dogs? Do I need to enjoy this great weather we're having right now? Like, what is it that is actually going to be restful for me? And don't let yourself trick yourself, right, into thinking it's something else to be productive.
Great. I'm going to open up this chat over for questions. If there are any, I think there might be.
I do. I have some questions. Okay. Hi, I'm Zoe. Zoe Cruz. I'm a junior here at the RSJ school, and I'm currently enrolled in Claudia's Latinos in the Eyes of the Media class, Journalism 306. A little bit about me. I'm originally from South Carolina, and I graduated high school from there and then quickly moved into the Navy, into the military life, and I was stationed in San Diego for 4 years. I deployed on the aircraft carrier, the USS Nimitz, during COVID from March of 2020 to February of 21, which was an extremely weird deployment. It was a weird time for everybody, right? Yeah, so then after that, I decided I wanted to get out of the military and pursue my passion for journalism again, so I decided to enroll here at RSJ. And yeah, I really identify with a lot of what you guys are saying because I am a biracial person. My mom is white and my dad is Chamorro, which is the indigenous peoples of Guam. And my family I do identify as Hispanic. And as I dig into my culture more, a lot of it, my family was impacted by Spanish colonization directly. My last name, Cruz, is Spanish and it comes from Spanish colonization. And the more that I dig into my heritage, the more that it's uncovered that the original colonizers of my family were actually slaves of the Spanish colonists. So very, very tragic, honestly. So I feel like there's a lot of trauma in my family, generational trauma, and that adds up and builds up and everything. And these conversations are extremely difficult for me still and extremely difficult for everybody, I feel. And unfortunately, I feel like it's been left up to the minority populations to really guide these discussions and talk about them, how they're affecting people, and really educate others. And that frustrates me, to this day. So I feel a lot of anger and rage when I'm here at school sometimes, just because of the imposter syndrome and people's privilege, and that I'm always having to educate people. It's quite frustrating. And even in the newsroom, I'm scared that when I get in there, it's still mainly white people, and I feel like I'm going to have to educate people all over again. And unfortunately, fortunately, racism, overt racism is now, it's bad, right? Nobody wants to be a racist. But unfortunately, that's led to microaggressions. And that's currently what I experience, almost daily. So how do you deal with those, microaggressions in the workplace? And how do you open up this conversation about trauma and experiences that you've had working with your bosses who are predominantly white and predominantly don't believe in this sort of rhetoric?
Okay. No. Well, firstly, I would say, look, I know that sometimes as people of color, we feel like we have to educate people. It's not your job to educate no one. So I think since we're talking about giving yourself permission to not do something, don't feel like it's your job to educate people, because it's not. You're here, you're at a university to educate yourself. Of course, we want to go back to our communities and foster that growth. But at the same time, if people are being racist towards you, you might have to check a bitch, but it's not your job to educate them, right? I'm a journalist. I can cuss. But look, sadly, I will say this. Microaggressions don't go away, right? Especially in systems that weren't created for us. Unfortunately, academia is one of those systems. If you just look at the history of academia, it wasn't meant for people of color, right? In fact, at one point, people of color were denied the right to an education. We can find posters that said no, slaves were allowed, no Latinos, no Black people were allowed. So now we're having to coexist with people in these systems. I will tell you that when I was younger, in fact, I'll tell you a story. I remember sitting in the newsroom and I was talking to, I guess, the people that bring in like the coffee in the morning. I remember Ben Affleck was a guest that day for Good Morning America. And the person that brought in the coffee came in to clean up, and it was a lovely lady. And I just said, hola, ¿cómo está? And my boss heard us speaking in Spanish, and he actually said, there they go again, speaking in tongues. And I've written about that in here, so I don't mind sharing that anecdote. And obviously, that wasn't just a microaggression. That was overtly racism, openly. And I never reported it. I just felt like, I literally think I had started my job. It was like probably 2 months into it. And I made the choice to not report it because, quite frankly, it's my boss. It's someone who has a huge control over where my career is going to go. And I just started. But I never forgot it. And, when I was younger, I felt like I was in a position where I couldn't report those things. But now, being an accomplished journalist, now with my pedigree and my trajectory, when I hear those things, I report them. And not only do I report them, I memorialize them. I have sat down with some of my bosses and have told them about the microaggressions that I faced. And sometimes they want to wipe them under the rug because it might involve people that they're friends with, right? And so sometimes they'll say, well, and so I will always say, well, just so you know, I'm gonna put this in writing. And, sure, that sometimes make things harder, but I think that, as we grow, we do have the responsibility to leave this world a little better than we found it. And, now I am in a position where I'm respected and where I'm taken seriously. And so I feel that I can report some of it. So I think, I can understand that in the beginning it might be sort of tricky and honestly sometimes you report it and it doesn't go anywhere. I think you just have to learn what fights you want to fight, pick your battles. There are some battles that are worth it. There's some that are not. And I think it's an individual decision, but I still to this day face microaggressions. And there are some that I report. There are some that I put in writing. There are some that I take all the way to the dean. There are some that I take all the way to the university level, because they're important to me. So it just really depends. There are some that I'm like, you know what? That's not worth my time right now. I'm just going to let it go. So it just really depends. But, I think we have to, unfortunately, it's one of those things that we will deal with, especially when we're, working in systems that weren't meant for us. Living in systems that weren't created for us. It's just part of the, I will tell you one thing though, a lot of it though is about just giving yourself permission to take up space. Beyonce has her alter ego, Sasha Fierce. Well, Jesús Ayala has an alter ego, and I don't know what his name is, but his alter ego is white. And I give myself permission to act like a white person, speak like a white person, make the same demands that a white colleague would make, because why do they get to make those demands and why should I shut up? I'm a tenure track professor. I get to make the same demands too. So, sometimes too, it's just the limitations we put on ourselves. No, I take up space. I have a voice. I'm going to take up space and use the voice. Yeah.
Yeah. I love telling students to have the confidence of a mediocre white man. It is one of my favorites, right? To take that confidence, right? Like, even if we have to put on this other persona or something that doesn't feel quite as comfortable or natural for us, right? And yes, a reality is we will face microaggressions or even more overt discrimination in our careers and our lives. And one of the things that I've appreciated, so I I'm one of the only Latinas over at Counseling Services. I have been for the last 2 years, and we have at least one of the only permanent staff. So we do have trainees that come and go, but as being the one, being tokenized at times, thinking about these pieces, one of the things that I've really appreciated is not feeling alone in it, right? How do I find that community? Some of that is some of my mentors that I've had along the way, being able to reconnect. I recently went back to Oregon over the summer for a friend's wedding, and one of the people that I cared the most to see again was my Latina mentor, who was also a psychologist, who really encouraged me to keep going when things were really difficult at times. So being able to reconnect with the people we trust. It's one of the reasons I love Alianza here, right? To be able to say, maybe I don't have that within my department right now. Maybe I don't have that within the people directly surrounding me every day at work. And I do have that on campus. I can connect with those folks. I can be like, hey, can you grab lunch with me tomorrow? I really need to just vent about something, and have the people who get it. Or we don't have to be the person educating them. We don't have to explain all of this of come on, how are you not seeing this, right? But they get it. And we can kind of skip past that and feel like we have people that are in our corner in that way who can encourage us, right? Do we want to take that step to go further? Do we have the power to do so, right? Or do we need to care for ourselves, and can they support us in that if we're not going to take that step? So having that community. Do we have a question, Ashley?
Yeah. Thank you so much. And I'm also going to big plug for NHJ, because similarly for journalists at a national level, this is a space where, again, we are trying to wedge ourselves into these systems, and sometimes only other reporters who are similarly situated can give you the advice, the mentorship, and a plug for the fact that here at the RSJ, we're trying to start a student chapter of NHJ so that students can feel supported and students can talk to each other, because outside of these walls, and maybe outside of these groups, you'll feel these microaggressions, right? But we could be a sounding board, and you can just, like you did right now, just share. So thank you. Ashley?
Hi, I'm Ashley. I'm also Claudia's student in Journalism 306, but I'm actually not a journalism student. I am a psychology student and a gender studies major. So this was particularly interesting to me from that kind of perspective. And I'm also a Latina wanting to get into the field and become a therapist in the future. But I think that that's also been a barrier for myself in seeking mental health help for myself, because I think that a big thing that I see a lot is when you can't express yourself, whether it's with language or culture, or in my casual conversations, when I try to talk in a real way, usually it comes out in Spanglish, or there's extra things in there that make it more impactful to me. And so the inability to find a therapist sometimes that can understand those things without me having to take the extra step of explaining them can make it really hard. So it's really exciting to meet a Latina therapist, and I hope to be that for someone in the future. But kind of going back to what you guys were talking about earlier, of this Latino urge to just work and work and work. We talked about finding some kind of balance for that, or learning to say no. But do you guys have any specific experiences or specific things that you've done to kind of do better at that, I guess, and just kind of allow yourself that, to advocate for yourself?
Great question, Ashley. Thank you.
I think for me, what really kind of, I think ever since I was in kindergarten, I've been an overachiever. I remember being in kindergarten and being student of the year. And by the way, I didn't even speak English yet, so I don't know how I did that. But you know what it is? I think I had to one day just ask myself, why do you think this is happening? Why do you have this sort of insatiable need to succeed and to overachieve? And, it just goes back to my parents, right? They came to this country illegally with me. And I think, being a first-gen student, I had to carry that on my back. Like, I had to sort of validate that them making that sacrifice and leaving our family behind was worth it. And so I think it's very common, and, we're talking about part of generational trauma. It's very common for the eldest or the first gen students to take on that trauma and try to validate their entire family's existence in a new country through their I was going to say logros because I couldn't think of the word, but through our successes, right? And, again, just going back to giving yourself that permission, I had to really, and this is a value of therapy, I really worked with my therapist on sort of finding a balance. Like, yes, what I'm doing is for my family, but I also don't have to carry that burden, because it's an enormous burden to carry. And just like I told you, like, you don't have to educate no one. I also don't have to be the one single person that carries their entire family's successes on their back. I mean, that is a heavy weight. And so I've learned to not really have to carry that weight, and it's been quite liberating. So for me, that's actually what has helped the most. My parents are proud of me, but also they're proud of my siblings, and we're all going to do whatever we can to keep their legacy alive. And so I think just acknowledging that has helped a lot, but also, finding therapy has been immense. And in just finding therapy and seeking therapy, I have broken generational trauma, because I can tell you no one in my family has ever sought therapy, and when we don't seek out therapy, we end up perpetuating bad habits that our family pass on. Our families do the best they can, but you have to also understand that mental health is not even something that they were raised with. So, my mom was 15 when she got married, so she was a child herself. So everything she learned about being a mother, she learned from my grandma, and my grandma learned from her mother. And so these things just get passed down, and sometimes you're taught to, do things just because they were the way they were. And so I think it's up to us who now have become educated and who know that there's a different way of doing things, and even a better way of doing things, to break those generational traumas. And I'm a firm believer in therapy, and I will seek out therapy for the rest of my life because it keeps me sane. And I see therapy not as something that's taboo, but it's just a matter of well-being.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Our families, our parents, right? They were taught to survive, not thrive, right? And we want to thrive, right? We don't want to just survive anymore, right? They wanted a better future for us. That means thriving and figuring out what that can look like for us. I welcome you over to Counseling Services. If you ever want to come by, you're welcome to speak in Spanglish. We have some providers. Love to work with you. But also, one of the things and one of the strategies I've really tried lately is to take a step back from what I'm doing, right? Just to take that step back, right? To have a bigger view of what's happening. And sometimes for me, it's writing down all my accomplishments, right? Like, did I actually give myself that recognition? Probably not, right? Let me write down all the things that I've accomplished already. Give myself that recognition. Am I really not doing enough? No, objectively, I'm doing a lot of things, right? And being able to recognize what we're doing. That might be taking that step back from our thoughts too, right? When we have that thought of like, oh, I'm such a bad student right now, right? Taking that step back. Okay, I'm having a thought that I'm a bad student. Is that actually true? What's the evidence for this thought, right? Like, is there actually any proof of this? Probably not, right? So taking that step back so we don't feel like us and our thoughts are so interconnected, right? Can we take that step back from our thoughts, our feelings, keep growing that awareness of it so we can recognize, right, when we're headed to that burnout? Because we can recognize, oh, I'm going towards that productivity. I'm having those thoughts again. I can take that step back. Really finding those ways to be objective, because our minds are not objective, right? Our minds have their own strength. Our minds really want to tell us to do more. And, right, those are all those messages from our families. Those are those generational messages. We got to do a lot to take that step back to heal, not just for ourselves, but for our communities, our families, those generations before us. It's hard work. We got to take care of ourselves in that process.
They call it monkey brain. My brain is like a monkey. It's going to go, and I have to like slow it down and bring it back to reality.
Well, we've hit the end of this panel. Again, thank you to the audience for being here, to our amazing panelists. I've learned so much. And I think again, thriving, not surviving, taking space for ourselves and pacing ourselves is important. Taking mini vacations and kind of reminding yourself that the physical, mental, spiritual, emotional self-care is important, and to seek interconnectedness and community and resources, because we're not in this alone. There are people who've, like Jesús and Christina, who've done this before us and who are here to give us advice. And hopefully, again, thank you for what you're doing in your research with the Mindful Newsroom, because as a school of journalism who is very aware of the stressors in our industry, we want to make sure that we are preparing our students for their future and for their own career development, especially, again, in an industry where we are losing people, not just because of budget cuts in newsrooms, but because of the stressors of the workplace. We want to ensure that all the hard work and the investment we've put into our students is demonstrated moving forward. So just a big plug again to the counseling services. They have drop-in hours and you can schedule appointments. The Reynolds School, I believe this year we might bring back our Never a Lone Wolf series, which is monthly, I think it was a monthly event, not just weekly, where we did bring in a therapist, a counselor to just meet with students here. And you can schedule services with that individual as well. I'll come back to you and make sure that we are continuing that, because we did realize that, especially during COVID, again, journalism is a very social career. So when young people, we're finding that they are isolating themselves because of anxiety and stress, we realize they may not be their full self in the workplace. So we wanted to acknowledge that particular theme. And again, to our sponsors, the Reynolds School of Journalism, University of Nevada, Reno, and Alianza Affinity staff and faculty group, and National Association of Hispanic Journalists, Nevada chapter. Thank you so much. Hopefully you'll join us again in the future.